Amendment J, if you vote yes on it, it will remove the provision of the state constitution that says only a union of one man or one woman shall be valid or recognized as a marriage in this state. This was approved via ballot initiative in 2002, I believe. And now there's an effort to remove that in light of the Supreme Court decision in Obergefell that allows for gay marriage. I disagree. I believe that you should vote no on this. And I'll give Dr. Rich Guggenheim the first perspective on this. Tell us why people should vote yes on Amendment J.
Well, thanks, Jeff, for having me. My reason for it is quite simply founded in the conservative ideology of limited government and the fact that freedom and liberty belong to all people, and this concept of freedom versus force versus freedom. And then the other piece of it is, quite frankly, it comes down to defending capitalism, which, as you know, is the most ethical form of economics. And, when you look at how much same-sex marriage, when it was legalized, contributed to our economy to the tune of $3.8 billion and has created 45,000 jobs, from an economic perspective, a free market perspective, it just makes sense to get government out of regulating marriage and say, you know what, we have an obligation to protect the rights and freedoms of all people, regardless of who that person's sexually attracted to.
Great. So from my perspective, Dr. Guggenheim, and I really appreciate you taking time to engage in this debate. This is what we love about this show and why it doesn't happen on other shows. I think it's important to define marriage. Can you tell me what marriage is?
Well, I'm going to ask you what marriage is and what informs your perspective of what marriage is.
So marriage is a unique relationship from pretty much any other relationship, right? So the state doesn't really regulate, for instance, friendships, doesn't regulate who you date. It doesn't regulate who you have sex with. It doesn't do any of that. It has a special vested interest in marriage because marriage in itself is different. The definition of marriage is one man, one woman, spending a lifetime in commitment to each other, raising the children that relationship produces. So why does the state have interest in this particular relationship when it doesn't in who you date, even who you have sex with? Is because marriage is the primary institution by which future citizens of the state are created and shaped. And so it has a vested interest in supporting it, in celebrating it, in honoring it, and in this case, defining it. So if we're going to take the gender restrictions out of marriage, right, we're going to say, well,
I got to interrupt you there, Jeff.
Go ahead.
It's sex, not gender.
Okay. Yeah. So I see them as the same, right? Sex, gender.
Don't make me bring the space rhinos into this.
Right. Bill's going to get into it. I think sex informs gender. I think they're uniquely linked. But anyways, so if
we just got to clarify that for the people out there who think there are infinite genders, there are only two sexes, male and female, and it's genetically determined at conception.
Yeah. So the gay marriage movement took sex out of the equation with regards to marriage, right? So two men can have a relation, it can be married, two women can be married. But what I see in all this is a lack of definition anymore. So we're willing to take sex out of it. Why don't we take number out of it too? Why can't 3 people be married? Why can't 4 people be married? Why we have taken away the foundation entirely for what marriage is. And we actually have no definition of it anymore. But I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Guggenheim.
And, that's interesting that you say that. And I'm curious to know what perspective, like what aspect of your life formed that perspective. Because in some cultures, bigamy is actually legal. In some cultures, religion dictates that marriages are arranged. In some cultures, even here in the United States, not too long ago, and still unfortunately, we see again another push to lower the age of consent. Your marriage could be as young as 13 or 14. And throughout history and in different cultures, marriage is defined differently. So I'm curious to know what it is that informs your definition of marriage as between one man and one woman, because even here in the United States, there are certain religions and certain cultures that practice bigamy. The Latter-day Saint movement practices polygamy, where a man can have more than one wife. And they will use the Bible to say that it is biblically justified.
Well, I think you can make a very reasonable argument that it is the best form of relationship for the development of children. So let's look at one man, one woman, right? I think there's lots of complications if you bring in 3, 4, 5 people. So I think you can make an argument that polygamy or bigamy or anything that happened in Utah. And most Mormons don't believe in this, by the way. It's a fundamentalist kind of sect of Mormonism that does. But I think you can make an argument that it is not best for children. And when you have one man, one woman, you have both male and female traits that are uniquely different pouring into those children in a stable context where the dad's not running out, sleeping with different people. He doesn't have 3 or 4 different families. All social science points to the fact that you remove a dad from the relationship, that child is more likely to end up in prison. That child is less likely to graduate from high school. That child is more likely to end up in poverty. You have all this social science that goes, okay, so you take the dad out of the equation, you have a problem there. So study after study after study shows that a stable family with male, female attributes being poured into the children that are created in that institution, which is what marriage is, end up thriving. And that is why the state has an interest in making sure that families thrive and flourish. This is the critique I have against the kind of non-social conservatives, those that are kind of free market. We are never going to get to limited government until we have healthy families. So I'm going to put it back on you again, Dr. Guggenheim. What is the definition of marriage?
I believe that marriage is a contract that you enter into with another person, and it is regulated by the state, licensed by the state. And I don't believe that that is a proper role of government to license and regulate marriage to begin with, but that's probably beyond the time scope that we have here today. But it is, in my opinion, it is a contract that you enter into to control another person and their property and the rights to decide what to do with that person, literally, and their effects should something happen, and make decisions affecting that person.
But you could do that without a marriage, though. I mean, Billy and I could have a contractual relationship right now for him to manage my property. We don't necessarily have to call that marriage.
That's what I just said. I don't believe that the government has a proper role in licensing and regulating marriage. You're using it, though, as justification for nothing more than procreation. So I would ask, do you validate marriages after a woman goes through menopause? Are infertile couples? You do.
Sure. Oh, yeah. But we're talking about the primary reason why the institution exists, right? So you can absolutely get married later in life. That doesn't negate what the primary role of it is and why the state is interested in it. Like I said, the state really doesn't care who you have sexual relationships with. It doesn't care who your friends are. It doesn't care who you're dating are. But for some reason, historically, the state has had a vested interest in a unique institution that produces children and raises them to become future citizens and wants them to be healthy. You can't have a nation. You can't have a nation if you don't have healthy families. And that's why it's interested in this. So just because, older people can get married, absolutely they can. But the primary reason that the state is interested in this is not because of who you love or who you build a contract with, because you can do that without a marriage. They're interested in this because of the family formation that takes place out of it.
So let me ask you, historically, if you've ever done genealogy, you have the answer to this question. Who regulated marriage? Who provided the service? And how did you go about being married historically? And this goes back before the founding of the United States and the government intruding upon people's private lives and deciding they were going to license and regulate marriage for what you think is procreative purposes.
Help me understand the question a little bit better, Dr. Guggenheim. I mean, I think a lot of it was religion-based, right? So church-based were most marriages?
Exactly. So
right.
If you wanted to get married, and if you've ever done genealogy, you know that you don't go to the courthouse, you don't go to the parish records hall, you went to the church to find those records, because it was the church who regulated marriage, because historically religion was the institution that defined what marriage was, and that's who provided those services. So it wasn't until the United States was formed and the United States government and the state's government started figuring out that they had, I disagree, I don't think the government has a vested interest in protecting marriage at all, because they're only doing it because they found out that they could make money off of it. And so they provide this license that says, okay, you have our blessing to go out and control this person. That's all it is. The government doesn't care if you have children. The government isn't telling you, you can only get this license from the state if you promise to produce offspring. And that's why you see that the United States right now, most young people are not having children when they get married. So there's nothing in that contract that you get from the government that says, yeah, you're going to have to produce children. They don't have a vested interest in that, because if they did, they would have stipulated that obligation in the contract that you get from the state when you get your marriage license.
Yeah, I just don't see that, because I think what happened was marriage was generally understood culturally to be one man and one woman up until about 25 years ago, right? And so the United States recognized that. I mean, there was a small gay rights movement in the 70s and 80s, but it didn't reach cultural kind of impact the way it has until the mid 90s. So if you want to go, I mean, you're the one kind of going back to the 1800s, the formation of this country. Back then, it was expected that culturally that you were to get married to live monogamously. It wasn't until the sexual revolution in the 60s that changed, but that you were going to build a family. The state recognized that was the foundational formation of families in this country, and recognized that it needed to have certain legal protections, right? We have lost all definition of what marriage is. We can't tell, this culture can't tell you why to get married. This culture can't tell you why two people should be in a marriage, not three people, not four people, why male and female need to be in a marriage versus male. We have no definition. It is totally out there. And in my ballot guide, I point out that when our culture can't define things, it gets confused. And this is, Dr. Rich, this is where you and I agree, that the left can't even define what a woman is. And when it can't define what a woman is, you get men playing in women's sports. You get men in women's locker rooms. And so I think it's paramount that our culture is clear on its definitions. And there's a unique relationship that takes place between a male and a female in the production of children. And when they live monogamously and raise those children, something really great happens, and it's the creation of a family. That is why I think marriage needs to be protected. I'll give you the final word here. Go ahead.
I appreciate that we can disagree. I believe that when it comes right down to it, the United States, the Declaration of Independence, and our Constitution give us certain rights. Those rights are the right to life, the right to freedom, and the right to property. And at the end of the day, what marriage is about is freedom and property, and allowing that to be something that every person in the United States, regardless of who they are, regardless of whether they're a man, a woman, or straight or gay, is a right that we have to protect from being violated by the government and by individuals. And if you understand the basic force behind this, I think that there's a lot of people who are using religion to justify this. And to those people, I will tell you the same thing that I tell the trans people and vegans. You have a right to believe whatever it is you want to believe in. You're free to do that, but you are not free to force your beliefs on other people. And so this is about force versus freedom. and that when you force your beliefs on other people, you infringe upon their freedoms, you violate their freedoms. And in this case, that is a conservative foundation, the principle of allowing people to the free exercise of their choice, and the right to get married is something that is fundamental for anybody. I disagree with you. I don't think that anybody who studies history can see that depending on where you live, there's cultural differences, there's differences in time on what marriage looked like. And it is still evolving because our culture has evolved. And, if you want to have a marriage between one man and one woman, go get that marriage. But if you think, like I do, that marriage is something for everybody, regardless of sexual orientation, don't infringe upon those people's freedoms and liberties.
Dr. Rich Guggenheim, I really appreciate the time. I want to give you a chance towards the end here to talk about Gays Against Groomers, organization you're leading. You host rallies to try to prevent this agenda being forced upon kids, the radical trans agenda being forced upon kids. Give folks a little bit of insight into that organization.
All right, thank you. Gays Against Groomers is also an organization of gays, lesbians, bisexuals, and transgender people. And we oppose indoctrination, sexualization, and medicalization of children. And unfortunately, we see so much of that happening in schools right now. We're seeing school boards where the school boards are passing policies right now that keeps information from parents. If a child identifies as something other than their natal sex, if they have new names, new pronouns they go by, they're putting books in classrooms that are completely inappropriate for children. They're having conversations with children that are completely inappropriate and would be considered sexual harassment if those same conversations were had with adults. These books are sexually explicit and graphic. These pride flags do not belong in classrooms. The drag shows that have children at them, drag queen story time, inappropriate for children. The idea that we can change a child's sex and at 12 and 13 years of age, pump them full of chemicals that castrate them and mutilate their bodies is inappropriate. And it's a modern day form of conversion therapy. So we from inside the community fight back against that. Let the kids grow up, let them decide when they're adults. Let the kids figure it out when their prefrontal cortex has developed and they can make those decisions on their own. And, protect, like you said earlier, protecting girls' sports. Girls have the right to compete in a safe, fair place. They have the right to privacy in the locker room and in the bathroom. And they have the right to safety and saying no to men in their spaces. And so that's the things that Gays Against Groomers fights for. You can check us out by going to gaysagainstgroomers.com and also following us on the social medias, GAG_Colorado.
Dr. Rich Guggenheim with the Colorado Log Cabin Republicans and Gays Against Groomers. I really appreciate the time today. Amendment J, which would remove, if passed, it would remove the definition of marriage from the Constitution that reads only a union of one man and one woman shall be valid or recognized as a marriage in the state. Dr. Guggenheim, a yes, me, a no. And I know I saw a video from our good friend Valdemar Archuleta about this, and he does point out it's not replacing the definition of marriage. It's just removing it entirely from the amendment, from the Constitution, which I have concerns about because I think it's important for us to define terms. But to Valdemar's point, and I do want to recognize it, it does not replace it by saying now marriage is open to anybody at any point for anything. It's just removing the definition that says only a union of one man and one woman shall be valid and recognized as a marriage in this state. Well, Dr. Guggenheim, thanks so much for taking time to join the Jeff and Bill Show.
You're welcome. Have a great rest of your day.
Jeff and Bill, weekday mornings from 6 to 10 on News Talk 710, KNUS.